Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program, we're joined today by someone who has graced our program a couple of times in our past and has brought us wonderful insights about things such as relationships and spiritual development. He is the acclaimed author of The Secret of Letting Go, The Essential Laws of Fearless Living, along with 35 other major works that have sold more than 1 million copies in 18 languages worldwide. He is also the director of Life of Learning Foundation and a Center for Spiritual Discovery, as well as the Foundation's popular Key Lesson emails, which are read each week by hundreds of thousands of subscribers in 142 countries. His work is also widely endorsed by doctors, business professionals, celebrities, and religious leaders of all denominations. The newest book is Relationship Magic, in which he talks about the specific actions that a person can use to build the type of relationship that very few people experience. Everything that we need to know about how to share in and grow in relationships that is never stagnant, but always fresh, spontaneous, fun, affectionate, and incorruptible. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Guy Finley. Guy, thank you for being back on the program.
Oh, I'm glad to be back, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
You know, you've been busy. When you take a look at the fact that you've been on national appearances on major networks, and things like that, and talked with thousands of people, seminars, so forth and so on, what has it been like for you out there since the last time we talked?
Well, I think you nailed it. Busy, but
busy.
Yeah, you know what though? There's a grace to it, Daniel, because one wishes there were at times, that you could just completely kick back. The love of the work that I do and what it gives me in return, and I don't mean monetarily. The discoveries, the insights, the continual growth of understanding. That's worth everything to me.
Now, when you think of the title, Relationship Magic, the key word being magic, I think that's what a lot of people pursue. You certainly see it, in the tale of myth and fairy tales, for instance, that ideal of happily ever after. What exactly is magic in reference to what we're talking about here today?
When we habitually think of magic, let me clear my throat. We think of someone on stage and they go into a box on one part of the stage and they're instantaneously transferred to a box on another side of the stage. We think of perhaps alchemical processes where, as in some of the fairy tales, straw is changed into gold, so that the idea of magic has to do with the idea of transformation, that something can be transformed from one nature, one quality, into another quality, obviously superior. And that's what I mean by magic, relationship magic. How can we as human beings understand ourselves and our partners well enough, deeply enough, that in those old moments, meaning the patterns, the old arguments, resentments that appear automatically, that we can actually transform those very moments that are now so hurtful into something that is actually healing on the spot for both of us, myself and my partner. That's the magic. Being able to transform what is old, predictable, and painful into something that is completely new, unpredictable because it is new, and healing in the end because we both leave those moments where we're able to wield this kind of new understanding. We leave it as another order of ourselves, a better type, a better person.
I couldn't help as I was reading your book, Relationship Magic, to realize, first of all, the simplicity of it all. and how we tend to, at first people read this and go, I'm not sure I know what the heck this guy's talking about here. You sit back and you got to absorb it just a little bit, and you realize the reason it seems complicated is because we seem to be in that habit of doing so. For instance, let's take a look at a fairy tale. Not Cinderella, but there's, I think it could be Snow White. I can't remember which one it was. And I think of the Disney cartoon version where the princess, or the potential princess, if you will, is somehow deep in the thorny bushes. There's a dragon that's pretty much keeping sentry over her, and the prince has to strike through all the thorns to get to her and fight the dragon all at the same time. And you realize somehow that's where we start in relationships as we leave, for instance, the house into adulthood, teenage, whatever the case is, and we discover our first relationship. We had the princess there to begin with, and then all of a sudden the thorns grew and the dragon was there. And you realize, well, the fact is we complicated and created all those barriers ourselves without even being aware they were there in the first place. Key operative, not being aware they were there in the first place. Let's go ahead and expound on that a little bit.
I think that if we look at it closely together, all of us, that we'll see that in one respect, at least the way that I'm laying it out and asking readers, people who listen to me give talks to understand what you've just said, is that there are essentially 3 stages, Daniel, in a relationship. The first stage is when, like you said, we meet someone and it's a fairy tale. They can do no wrong. Everything about the other person is fascinating, and apparently we seem the same to our partner.
Apparently.
Yeah. And that's actually quite natural, and if you will, under law. Because what's going on in those moments is that through the relationship I have with my partner, I'm being introduced to parts of my own nature, aspects of my character that I didn't even know existed. Now we can illustrate this simply, and everybody should be able to see it. As an example, I live here in southern Oregon, and by good fortune, at least I think, I live on top of a small mountain where it's pretty wild. I have deer that come and see me every morning and late afternoon to get their little cob, their little treat. Most of them I can hand feed. And I love their visitation because when I'm sitting in my room here, my office, I'm experiencing the room, the work I'm doing, and my relationship to the moment all depends upon what I'm interacting with. Then I get to change what I'm interacting with. And if you will, the relationship with the deer brings up a completely different character in myself. I get to feel if there's a big buck out there, that unbelievable, unbridled strength of a wild creature. If there's one of the new little does, one of the babies, the fawns, then when I'm standing there looking at this little creature, I can feel the timidity. I can feel that sort of edge that exists in all newborn creatures waiting to jump at the drop of a hat, so that the relationship is actually the source of a revelation of a part of myself that ordinarily I don't realize. Is that clear, Daniel?
Absolutely.
So that we get this idea that when we look at a sunset or the fall leaves or the matted soil with the leaves that are now covering the ground, that each and every relationship we're in, by its very nature, stirs in us and reveals subsequently a sense of ourself that until we're in that moment with that situation, that deer, that tree, whatever it is, we just don't know these things live in us. Now let's transfer that idea to our new partner. suddenly I can feel all of these powers. You know, there's obviously there's the physical attraction. That's a horse of a color all on its own. There is the fact that they seem to be delighted with everything I say, which is,
I'm Mr. or Mrs. Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, so that when I'm with my partner in the early stages, everything about the relationship is refreshing or reawakening or just flat out bringing up things I didn't know I had in me. I didn't know that I was willing to sacrifice something for the sake of somebody without taking thought, but it was mindless. I didn't need to consider it. I wanted you to be happy because when I'm with you, making you happy makes me happy. So we have this first stage where with our relationship, each of us brings out the best in the other. That's the first stage where everything's delightful. We can't have enough of each other. And by and large, it's just a process of discovering. Now, this is important, not so much about the other person as that I can't discover something new about my partner without realizing a corresponding newness in myself. That's the first stage. But now you've brought up where the thorns and the dragon begin to appear. And in some order of time, and there's no denying it, our relationships turn out slowly from you bring out the best in me to you're starting to bring out the rest of me. Parts of myself that I don't particularly like and that I had no idea lived in me, because all along I found ways as I was growing up and I was educated by culture to blame others for these parts of myself that others bring up in me. So we go from one mindset where we can't wait to be with our partner, slowly shifting into places inwardly where little by little the same exact dynamic. They're not causing me to feel that anger or resentment. They are revealing to me, much as they did in the first lovelier stages, aspects of my character that I didn't know lived in me. So that when this starts to go into the second stage, where you're bringing out the rest in me, we need to understand that that's part of the purpose of love. That is part of the purpose of our relationship. It isn't just to reveal everything that's wonderful and beautiful and consoling. Part of the purpose of any relationship that love creates is to help both of the people in that relationship wake up and begin to realize that we have brought with us into that relationship the seeds of those thorns, the chrysalis of that dragon. And our partner introduces us to these limitations in us so that for the sake of love, we can begin to meet these parts of ourselves, transcend them because we understand they can't be pushed away, that no one's to blame for them, and in that become a different kind of man or woman who, as they develop, become capable of a completely different kind of love, where now it's no longer just you bring out the best in me, but you are introducing me to limitations that I have brought with me through time so that they can be healed and released. But before that happens, the concealed must be revealed, and that's part of the purpose of our relationships that we don't yet understand. And as you said, the book makes evident and surprising that it's so clear, and yet we've been so confused and in conflict over these moments with our partner.
You know, and there it is, because as you were saying, as we had both talked about, we approach what seems to be love from our point of view in that honeymoon stage.
Right.
And I keep thinking of the movie Barbra Streisand, The Mirror Has Two Faces. and she's a professor in this class talking about love and why do we buy into it when we know that it doesn't last. And she's talking about the perception of the honeymoon stage. And she says, well, we buy into it because for while it lasts, it feels pretty darn good.
Right.
Well, we're talking about getting through that part, getting into the realms that we're not used to seeing coming up. And that's the funny thing about love and relationships is they will bring out, let's say in this example, the worst in us, at least the way we see it. Because, as you said, we're so in bliss with how we're making that other person feel so good. We know we can't sustain that. It's not possible. However, what's possible is to get through to reveal the truth, much as a sculptor has the clay, stripping away the non-essentials until the truth is revealed.
Right.
And then that's where the magic starts to really happen. Like, I'm so glad you came into my life because there are these reactions that I'm having that I didn't know were in me, that subconscious that lays beneath the surface, as you talk about in your book. And once you come to that point, you realize the flexibility begins to reveal itself in ways you never would have imagined.
Yeah, that's well put, Daniel, because we start to realize, and it is, how do I say this? I don't bring somebody into my life, and that somebody doesn't bring me into their life. Love brings us together. I'm going to say it again. I've been married for now almost 40 years. I did not bring my darling Patricia into my life. And Patricia, even though she likes to think she did, she did not bring me into her life. Love brought us together. See, part of the book, Daniel, that's right in front of the reader and yet virtually never stated, is that we are on this planet as human beings to serve a purpose that is greater than acquiring possessions, making plans, arranging powers that give us authority over others or circumstances. Almost all of the things that we now busy ourselves with, in one respect, are a way in which we are avoiding the kind of revelations that actually heal and change the heart and make it more susceptible, more present to this love that we're talking about, so that without understanding how love works, we don't realize that our purpose on this planet is to become a newer, better, truer, more loving human being. And that's really the only value there is. Because until we become a newer, truer, loving human being, we are, just as you said, someone who at the drop of a hat is suddenly doing, as St. Paul said, not the good that we would, but rather the evil that we wouldn't, but never recognizing that we do the harm that we do, not because of what our partner has done, but because in our consciousness is a character that we don't know lives in us and that virtually creates the conditions it needs in order to express itself so that we can then go through our life either having an enemy or hating ourselves for the kind of weakness that we finally reveal when our partner seems to push us over the edge. Here's an example, if I may. When we lose our temper with our partner, and we do, is the reason that we lose our temper with our partner because of what they are momentarily exhibiting? Or is it because what our partner is exhibiting is frustrating a demand that we have about their behavior that we don't know we carry around with us? And the answer should be evident. We are a body of expectations. And without knowing it in the honeymoon stage, the first part where you bring out the best in me, each and every one of us in that stage of a relationship looks at our partner as being the source, unmitigated, of our happiness. I can't think about you enough. You know that the days where you used to fall asleep with the phone attached to your ear because you couldn't hear the person's voice enough? And then gradually it turns from I can't hear the voice enough to I don't want to hear the voice because I know the tone. And in those times where this shift takes place, begin to understand that without knowing it, something in me was making this investment in you. And the investment to the mind of that nature was that you will always be who I depend upon when I hurt to come to for consolation. I depend upon you always flattering me, seeing the very best in me and always saying so. I depend upon you to never upset me, because that's how it was in the beginning. I could come to you and I could tell you about a problem and you'd listen, not push me away because you had a problem of your own. So this relationship that begins with this idea of my partner is responsible for my happiness begins, as it must, under the weight of passing time, to where my partner is no longer capable, or for that matter, willing to bear all of my manifestation without complaint. And little by little, that person begins not to answer my expectations, but to be absent in their presence, so that I blame you for my expectations. And then I want to punish you. I want to change you. I want to make you back into who I imagined you were when we first started being together. So we meet these moments where little by little, our partner, instead of being the apple of our eye, starts to turn out to be something that pokes us in the side without realizing that we would never have the feeling of a button being pushed if we didn't have the button in us before the person acted. So what my book makes clear is what these buttons are, how they were born, how they are cultivated without our knowing it, and how we bring them into every relationship with us, not just with our partner, but with the partner who stands in front of us in the grocery market, our partners at work, the people on the freeway, everybody. Life is relationship. That means everything is our partner. And when we begin to wake up to that, we can start to use those moments where someone or something pushes the button, and instead of trying to punish them for what they have revealed in us, we can learn to wake up and use those moments to release ourselves from the past, release ourselves from the parts of us that keep the pattern going, because we understand those parts are not who we are. They have been passengers with us through this life, and now it's time to get on another train or kick them off the one we're on.
Now, you reveal what's key here, and that is, the insight, because people might be wondering, well, how do we know when those moments come? And simply put, as you talk about, and certainly in my experience, is you catch a reaction in a situation that seems to just come up. And I know one of the examples that you talk about in the book is where there was a relationship between a couple where he seemed to be creating an argument or a fight in a means of protecting himself from what he felt was inevitably about to happen.
Right.
Okay. Let's talk about that, because I noticed, as I've interviewed wonderful people over the many years. In fact, I just realized this morning as I was thinking about this interview This year actually makes 20 years of broadcasting for myself.
Congratulations, Dan.
You know, you look back and go, my goodness, the amazing people such as yourself that I've talked to over the years, and you know, what I've been able to absorb and learn and so forth, and you realize, you know, one of the key elements people might say, well, how do I know that's happening is, you know, and we'll let you get to this example from, for instance, you know, the man who was protecting himself by creating a fight or an argument just so he can avoid the pain that he felt that he would inevitably feel. But it's when you react to something through a filter that doesn't really actually exist. It just exists in you. So
yes.
Let's talk about that.
We have to, and I'm assuming that we're all interested in being more loving, authentically kind human beings, not men and women who are, as we presently are for the most part, actors, people who, when the button gets pushed, act out what we believe we're supposed to be in those moments, instead of realizing that the moment has come to actualize characters in our consciousness that are inhibitors, that are limitations to our capacity to change the kind of person that we are. So, Daniel, you be advocate, if you will, for the listeners. So when somebody irritates you, can we all agree, Daniel, can you agree in those moments that there's something the person is doing or saying, and as they do and say what they do, I am having essentially a negative reaction to what they're putting down? We can agree with that, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, can we also agree that when I'm having that negative reaction, that that's synonymous with some kind of suffering? If I'm having a negative reaction, am I not in pain in that moment?
Right.
Now, please, everybody, listen. So my partner has done something, and for whatever reason, suddenly I have had this negative reaction, and I am in pain in that moment. Now, my perception in that moment does not include the fact that I am in pain. What I see is the person responsible for my pain. And all I see is someone to blame for my pain. And here's the kicker: without knowing that they wouldn't have acted towards me the way they did if they hadn't been in pain. So we're looking at a dynamic that we never see, and that is that when it comes to these unsavory, problematic patterns between two people, pain picks the fight. My wife doesn't pick the fight. I don't pick the fight. Pain picks the fight. And until we understand that, we'll never get to the bottom line, which is that no one wins a fight when pain picks it. Because when pain picks the fight, pain has won. Because all pain is interested in is its continuation, pure and simple. There's a beautiful Aesops Fable that describes a lion and a water buffalo meeting in the desert at a water hole that is almost dried up, save for a small puddle of maybe 10 drops. And they're sitting there, and the evidence is that these two creatures are about to enter into mortal combat to see who wins the water. And then the eye is lifted to a tree, a dead tree sitting above the pond, in which sits a vulture that's smiling. And the meaning of the fable is that when we fight, we lose. even if we win. But what always wins is the nature in us that is bringing us to that fight. To understand this, Daniel, is the beginning of recognizing that if I love someone, again, you as advocate, if I love somebody, do I want to hurt them ever?
No, not
Does
at all.
love ever want to hurt another human being? Clearly not. And yet here I am. I'm with my wife of 40 years. I'm with my husband. We've been through hell and high water together. I walk in the door. I've had a tough day. I expect him or her to greet me like they should. But they've had a tough day too. And because I walk in the door not knowing, I'm already resisting what's happened to me. And you're not responding the way I think you should toward me, which is to lay down your life and give it to me. Suddenly, I have this reaction. And the reaction is, you don't love me anymore. You don't treat me the way you used to. And I believe that the moment in which I feel this reaction, that it's actually based in truth, meaning that my pain in that moment is because of something you're doing. No. And I'm not saying our partner isn't doing something. They're in pain too. What I'm saying is that what my partner is showing me in that moment, and what I must understand if I really want to have a heart that opens and that loves unconditionally, is that they are not creating the condition I'm blaming on them. They are revealing in me a level of consciousness that wherever it goes creates that condition, because that pain that remains concealed in me will continue to create the pattern until the pain is revealed and understood for being what it is, a remnant of an old nature, a character out of place because it no longer belongs as an authority as it once was. And this gradual awakening, which is why the subtitle of the book is Waking Up Together, not only changes me, but it allows my partner to have the space they need to see that I'm not the problem they want to blame me for being either. Because what happens when I'm set off and I blame you? Do I not try to change you? Do I not try to fix you, blame you for my state?
That's true.
And then do you not react to me blaming you so that now you think your state is because of me? And you have two people pushing against one another, trying to prove that the pain is the responsibility of the partner, when the pain is not my partner's responsibility. It's my responsibility. And my partner's pain is not my responsibility. It's their responsibility. So that when you have two human beings beginning to understand it's not my pain, it's our pain, you have the possibility of each man and woman granting room, space to the other person. Why and how? By learning to realize that if I sit here and give voice to this part of me that's saying I'm a victim of my partner, I will forever remain the dupe of a nature that will always find someone or something to blame for its pain. That understanding is the beginning of learning what it means to truly love ourselves and our partner, because now we understand what love actually is. Love actually is letting go of what is limiting our relationship, so that instead of making up after a fight, we don't fight at all. We fight instead, if you will, with this part of ourselves that has been revealed at the onset of the moment, so that we're letting the awareness of these parts of ourselves begin to change what we formerly never knew lived in us and that we carry with us into these moments and causing the conflict.
You know, it's really amazing to think of the whole thing that way and to realize that, you know, you hear sometimes people say, you know, you bring out the worst in me, and you should be saying, well, if that's true, then thank you.
Daniel, look, you know what you just said? Love thine enemies.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Christ meant for those who were interested in that kind of teaching. He's saying that everyone that you meet is brought into your life. We know the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Right.
Well, we love when the teacher is giving us an A, but when the teacher brings up in us things that we don't want to learn about as being aspects of an unconsciousness, a nature that's asleep to itself, we reject the teacher. There's a part of my book where I say that love often appears at the door, knocking, in the guise of a beggar. There's lots of ancient myths, hero tales, Greek legends, how the gods would from time to time dress themselves up as beggars and go and knock on the door of people to see how the people would treat them. And if the people would let the beggars in spite of the fact that the people themselves may have been impoverished, which is simply symbolism for not knowing that, you know, we're not who we imagine ourselves to be. And then bring in this beggar, bring this moment where the teacher appears into our heart, then love rewards that man or woman. Love rewards that couple by giving them what only love can give them, which is a new and enhanced understanding of how beautiful the relationship is when it is begun to be realized as a constant staging ground for revelation. And there can't be a revelation within us that doesn't point to something that was concealed. That's what revelation is. Revelation is the moment in which something I couldn't see the moment before is suddenly there in front of me. And we all have parts of us that we bring with us from the past. I don't know if you ever had your heart broken. Before I met Patricia, I had my heart crushed.
I think we all have had at least one heartbreak. And,
yes.
And you look back, and here's the thing, in sharing my example, is, you know, as it was happening, and it took me probably a good 2 years that I felt to get over it, but here was the unique process about that whole thing, and it was something that I was very grateful for. And I remember meeting up with her probably about 6 months, you know, after this had happened, and I said, you know, I really want to thank you for coming into my life and for that happening to me. And I know at the moment it sounds probably a little harsh, but I certainly wasn't meaning to be harsh. But you helped me see what I didn't want in a relationship from someone. And I didn't really expound on that with her, but the fact was is I seen the truth of who she was right off the bat, but I chose to ignore it. Okay? And that being said, I realized that after the heartbreak had happened, that I was taking on all of her problems, and as a friend of mine said, I was taking them and I was owning them as though they were mine. And because of that, everything that I was doing, according to her, was my fault. But it was really her problems that I was taking on and mirroring, so to speak. Now, that being said, I realized one of the biggest things that was coming up with me was worthiness, that I just wasn't worthy of having someone like her in my life. And I said, wow, this is pretty wild. So this really, it's love in a different guise through someone else. So what is this unworthiness that I'm feeling here? And I realized, you know, pushing that aside, I'm going to spend some time, whatever it takes, to kind of come to know what is this in me that makes me feel so undeserving of something so good, so forth and so on. And I worked with that. So that was the real teacher, as we're talking about here today. You know, to where had someone like that come into my life afterwards, that I would have said, I don't see how this relationship right now can work for me because right now it's just too much work. Maybe you should go up on the mountain and get focused in your own way so that you can see the reality of what you're searching for, so to speak. And I'm not taking a position of arrogance. It's exactly what we're talking about, that teacher, that idea that we come to see ourselves. And love has us in a position of vulnerability. We've got the honeymoon stage. We feel strong like Samson and the hero in the, in the Snow White story. But then the thorns and the dragon come up, and now we feel vulnerable, and that scares us because we think that we're helpless to do anything about it. But that really becomes the rite of passage, especially in love, doesn't it?
It certainly points to that, because we begin having what are essentially revelations of the healing kind. But before we can begin to heal, and much to the point of what you had said after I brought up this idea that we bring with us after a heartache, like a mindset. Boy, I remember saying this, I'm never going to be hurt like that again. This will never happen to me. It's too painful. Now, when we say that, no matter what age we're saying it at, we are fully identified with the idea that the pain we're in is because of what the other person did. She betrayed me. She used me. He left me. He lied to me. Fill in the blanks.
He promised me. She said we were this.
Yeah, I'm never going to put myself in a condition like that. And without knowing it, that moment in time, seeded into our consciousness, is a fear. And we take that fear with us, not consciously, but it's there in the background. And it's there when we meet the new person, but we don't know it's there because it's the honeymoon time. But then as things change, as they must, naturally, then I begin, and I'm sitting with my wife, and I'm at a restaurant, and it looks like she's looking at somebody at the other table. I'm with my husband, and he's talking on the phone, and when I walk in, and he suddenly hangs up. Now, I don't know he was on with a dry cleaner, but my mind begins to tell me what it is that's happening. And I believe when my mind is telling me what's happening, that I actually know what's happening. But what I don't see is that fear, that part of me that said I'll never be hurt again, has used that moment to raise its ugly head to protect itself, not me, to protect that part of myself that was so punished it never wanted to experience anything like it again. And yet love has brought me into another relationship. But I bring with me into that relationship, without knowing it, aspects of a mind that are asleep to itself. And it is in that recognition that we bring with us parts that by the simplest touch, a remembrance, a momentary glimpse of something similar to what caused that problem back in our day, brings up the pain again. And we begin to experience that pain, and in experiencing it, we don't know what else to do with it, but blame our partner for the re-experience of our own consciousness. That revelation, the recognition of that fact, allows me to meet that reaction in myself with a certain doubt, with a willingness to examine it instead of cross-examine my partner for something they may or may not be involved in at all. This is how love changes us, because it produces conditions where the teaching moment brings up the possibility of these new interior perceptions that change us from the inside out.
And it's such a wonderful process when you come to a place that you can see that experience that way. I remember after my situation years ago, that you start to encounter people that seem to be going through the same thing. And you hear this, probably you've even said it yourself, and I don't, maybe I have, I don't know, where you say, I'm never going to let that happen again, or, I don't think I'll ever fall in love again. And I was at a point then where I said, if you're lucky, yes, you will. Because you realize the real gift it's bringing you, that this is a way to clear that out, to be in life and to truly be in the moment as you are. And the beauty of, for instance, if when people pick up Relationship Magic, Waking Up Together, the subtitle is, this is more than just loving relationships. This is your relationships with everyone.
Right.
We're talking about at work and so forth. And goodness gracious, just think about those relationships at work. And I'm certainly just not too long ago, I remember being in places where, this person I felt betrayal from. Like, I thought I was doing this for you, and all of a sudden you turned on a dime, and I feel betrayed by the relationship that I thought was this way. And I realized, wow, there's something in there, and you find yourself continually not just working on yourself to open that up and to release it, but then it seems that life, in the weirdest way, gets easier. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Look, I get upset with you because, and then something along the lines, you have betrayed me. Now, did the person act without conscience? Perhaps. But how does me feeling betrayed and swearing I'll never do that again put myself in a situation like that? Change me. What changes me is the beginning of the kind of revelation that relationship is intended to create. In this instance, I didn't know that somehow or other my identity had become so intertwined with yours that I became dependent on you approving of me. And the more you approved of me, the more I wanted to do for you. But the fact is, I wasn't doing it for you. Not really. I was doing it so that I could feel good about myself. I wanted to be a white knight. I wanted to be a hero. And this relationship produced the possibility of riding off into the sunset. And then one day, suddenly, there's a storm, and I want to blame you for an identity that I was deriving. I wasn't in a relationship the way I imagined it. I was enabling parts of you, and becoming dependent on that identity in myself. And by the grace of love, I get to discover that there is something in me that will enable another person in order to have that identity. Then love heals because it reveals these limitations. We're released from something that we don't know is keeping us from realizing that love is endless. Daniel, there's something that needs to be said. We think, and often happens to us when we're with our partner, well, looks like love has left the building. I can see it. And I want the listeners to understand, love never leaves anywhere. That'd be like saying the sun stops rising. It is we who fail to understand the way in which love is appearing in that moment. Love is always there. Love is always bringing people together so that people can discover through their relationships with one another, at home, at work, or wherever, that which is keeping us, the individual, from realizing what stands in the way of an ever broader, deeper, truer, and ultimately eternal relationship with love.
I know one key element that you talk about in your book, and it reminds me of something that even my wife would suggest to me, is this, in relationships. It doesn't matter whether it's a loving relationship, husband and wife, husband, wife, whatever the case is, or even co-workers, friends, all of it. All of it, as she would say, is you in the end.
Yeah.
But when you can transcend that point and you can begin to actually see the other as they are, as they truly are, would that be okay with you? And boy, there's a mind twister at first, but then you realize, what if they just love to court misery in their lives until they figure that out themselves? That's who they are right now.
Yes.
And as you say in your book, it's not your job to change somebody else.
Yes.
That's just a futile endeavor.
Yes. And even more so, how do you respond when somebody suggests a way for you to be better? There you are in some kind of a dispute, and suddenly somebody's throwing in your face aspects of yourself that, incidentally, by the strength of the denial, proves, methinks, as Shakespeare said, thou dost protest too much. That here I am, and my first reaction to you pointing out a limitation in me is to find a limitation in you.
Right.
And say, well, you're like this, and what we're looking at here, ideally, is that if I go to my partner to point out a limitation in them, I'm going to strengthen that limitation in them, because they're going to bow their back, and instead of actually considering the possibility that they may court misery by revisiting the past, bringing up old resentments, whatever it may be, if I don't try to fix them, I give them the space to see themselves as they are. I allow my partner to realize what it is that I've been saying, but not because I'm saying it anymore, but because when they manifest that behavior, I'm not resisting it anymore. I'm using their behavior to release me from the parts of me that resist them. That's win-win. That's magic. That's real love.
I'm reminded, and I love bringing this example up because it took me some years to understand what a fifth grade teacher, formal World War II veteran that we had, and he says this, and it's amazing when you grasp the reality of what he was saying, the truth of it. He says, when you point your finger out and blame at something, you got three fingers coming back at you.
Right.
I mean, you're three times more responsible for that situation than they were.
And look,
it took a lot of years, but when I finally got it, I said, inherently he's completely right.
Yes. And here's where we've been going. So everybody, if they're listening at all, they might think, I can see there's at least some wisdom in this. I may not like it, but I can't argue it, not really. And incidentally, quickly, listeners, we're not saying to stay in an abusive relationship. My book makes that clear. If you stay in an abusive relationship, you're enabling the abuser and the part of yourself that thinks somehow that you can change the person one day. You will not change an abusive person. Change yourself. But here's what I'm getting to. How do I begin to do what we're talking about? And I'll tell you something beautiful, and I know you'll appreciate this, Daniel. Do you know the original meaning, and I mean the ancient meaning of the word patience?
I can't honestly say that I do.
Listen to this, everybody. It means to suffer yourself.
Wow.
Tell me that's not beautiful.
Right.
So we say, well, how do I do this? My partner is setting me off. First, because you have new knowledge and a willingness to see your partner through a new set of eyes that knowledge allows and empowers. Sit with the moment where ordinarily you would pounce on them for the pain you blame on them, and patiently observe the nature that wants to pounce. Don't pounce. Patiently observe the pain. If you will learn to be patient, which means to suffer the parts of yourself that want to blame, you will begin to realize that the feeling you have is real, but the why behind it is a lie. Because the why belongs to something buried in this nature that's asleep and that is restirring and restirring every time a situation that's similar to its past pain pops it into our mind. If you will let the mechanical reaction go by, you will see the mechanical unconscious self responsible for it. That revelation of what has been concealed is the healing of it, because now you know that is not you and never has been. It can no longer serve love in the old way, but it will serve love by separating yourself from it through the understanding you can no longer instrument that destructive, corrupted aspect of your own nature. Now we understand patience. We understand what St. Paul said again, in my patience I possess my soul.
Very, and I can imagine some listeners today, maybe some of them will take this away and they'll go, okay, let's let the healing begin, and pretty soon, they begin to think they're waving a hand, and again, it takes time, as you said. There's patience that's involved, but is this worth doing? I'm sure after 40 years of marriage, and in my particular case, going on 17 now, I can say absolutely. When you get through, they call it the 7-year itch in some cases, and you realize what's really going on, and you start working on that, and it's continuous. It seems never ending, but it becomes, kind of fun actually. But then you start seeing the enjoyable aspects of your partner or even people that you work with in the most playful ways, and you realize, as Shakespeare say, all of life is a play, and you're just simply a part in it. You realize, wow, this is kind of fun. What am I going to get myself into now?
The most valuable moments in our lives are the ones in which we are suddenly shown something about ourselves that we didn't know was there. That means revelation is the real reward, and there is no greater source of revelation other than through our relationships with one another, particularly with our partner, because that's where the most sensitive ground sits and awaits these new seeds, this new understanding that turns old suffering into a completely different kind of situation where something new and refreshed is born out of it.
Well, Guy, it's always a pleasure to have you here on the program. A great conversation. Again, the book is Relationship Magic, Waking Up Together. And tell our listeners in the last minute or so that we have where they can find out more about your work, how to get the book, things like that.
Thank you, Daniel. If you're interested and want to follow up, first, go to relationshipmagicbook.com. One word, relationshipmagicbook.com. And on that page, you'll be directed to one of a few places where you can order the book online, the major retailers. But you don't have to get it through the major retailer. You can buy it anywhere. And once you do buy the book, and if you do buy it through the relationshipmagicbook.com, you will instantly be given a free download of the audio book that I read. You'll also receive a free 60-minute MP3 about 7 ways in which we can learn about a higher and happier order of love. So if you buy the book through relationshipmagicbook.com, you get 2 gifts. You get the audio book. Actually, you get 3. You get the audio book. You get a 3-hour webinar that I did last month on this topic, and you get the MP3. So, relationshipmagicbook.com. That's what I suggest. Again, you can buy the book anywhere else. Just go online, show the receipt, and you'll get the gifts. And if you just want to learn about the work I'm doing, go to guyfinley.org, www.guyfinley.org, and you can also learn about the book there. And that's it.
Guy Finley, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Again, always a pleasure.
You're the consummate host, Daniel. I enjoy our time together, and I thank you for the opportunity.
You
very
bet.
much.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can also discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter. Keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming programs. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.